Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome to my book corner, and I'm here in the flesh today to talk about a book I have not read for some reason earlier than this, and that book is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. So this title first came out in 2015, is about 470 pages long, and is book one in the Broken Earth Trilogy. This is a fantasy book with a fair chunk of sci-fi thrown in as well. As always, we're going to talk about the story before we're then going to talk about the world building, the characters, before looking at the presentation of the book as a whole, and then my final thoughts at the end. So let's just jump straight into this. This is what I would class as a dystopian fantasy novel. The story begins at the onset of a fifth season, and what a fifth season is basically, the best way to describe it would be like a nuclear winter. This is caused by natural events, so for example, supervolcanoes, earthquakes, tsunami, that sort of thing, where living conditions become almost impossible within the world, and this season can last anywhere from 6 months to possibly centuries or longer. And the actual setting for this is in a place called the Stillness, and it's set after the fall of major civilization due to some sort of cataclysmic event, and it's not made clear here what that event is, although there are some hints throughout the story. And as a result of that, this story begins at the onset of the fifth season, or a fifth season, and it's made clear straight away what causes it, or what onsets it, and how serious it's going to be. And then it switches to the point of view of 3 different characters. The first two, Demaya and Cyrenite, their stories both take place prior to the onset of the 5th season, several years before and a couple of decades before, depending on which one you're reading. And then you go to Essen, and their point of view is as the 5th season is starting and the effect it has on the world. Each of these characters have their own driving forces within the narrative. We'll touch on that in characters in a bit. But what this story does is it has a really strong running theme all the way through, and that theme is exploitation specifically. Be that exploitation of people or events or skills and abilities, or even the environment, all that is driven home throughout all this, because this is a very exploitative place in many regards. It is a story of systematic abuse, for want of a better word, and you have the point of view of the various different characters as they go through the run up to and the onset of the 5th season. And what really sets this story on fire, not quite literally, is the world building. So let's just jump into that next. This is maybe the best world building I've seen in a book for a long time, so I'm going to go into a little bit more detail here. There's not any spoilers in this section in general, so you should be fine. The first thing to talk about is, I've already mentioned that this is a place where exploitation is a major thing, and that's shown here with the system of how people's jobs are given out, because there's a caste system here. And there's various different groups in that caste system. So you have the strong backs, so these are your manual labourers. Unfortunately, during a 5th season, if there's too many labourers in a community, then the excess ones just get kicked out and they have to fend for themselves outside of the community. You have the resistance, so these are people who seem to be very resistant to disease or sickness, or don't need as much food to survive. They tend to be the ones that do a lot of the cleaning jobs. They look after the sick, and they perform other health and hygiene tasks. You then have the breeders class, so these are there to keep the number of people within a community stable, so you've not got too many, not got too few. And they produce children themselves, or they can have authorized children with selected members of the community. because they're trying to breed certain aspects into it. So maybe they need more people that are resistant to disease. Maybe they need stronger people. Maybe they need smarter people, or they want certain physical traits. People who aren't breeders that have kids, those kids are not given a portion of the community stores, so it's not unusual for people to starve to death or communities to get split up because of this. You then have the innovators. These are your creators. These are your doctors, your scientists, problem solvers, engineers. These are the people that invent and create things. You tend to find that there's not a huge amount of these in most communities. There is a couple of different educational places around the world, universities, where people go to train, however. And finally, you have the leadership cast, which is exactly what you think it is. These are people who are in charge of either communities or important organisations. And sometimes people who are born into this cast can be forced into the leadership role, even if they don't want it, if the need arises. On top of that as well, you have some other groups which we're going to talk about. And the first one we're going to talk about is called the Fulcrum. The driving force of the story overall is a specific group of people, and they are called the Orogenes, and they have basically a form of magic called orogeny, and this allows them to tap into the tectonic activity of the planet. Now, obviously, there's some issues here, because in this world, it is believed that the Earth hates people. Father Earth is trying to kill the people on there because of something that they did. And because of this link of the two, these people are not very well trusted in communities, to the point where if a child shows the ability to use orogeny, then they are given to a group called the Guardians. So the Guardians are kind of like enforcers who keep this group of people in line, and anyone who has this ability is supposed to go to an organisation called the Fulcrum, and this is where they are trained to control their gifts. Because like any sort of thing like this, if they lose control, a lot of people can get hurt and die. And they're trained while they're there, but very much they're trained to basically be almost but not quite a slave group. They do not have all the same freedoms of normal people. They are used to perform really important tasks and keep places safe because of their ability to potentially prevent volcanoes and earthquakes and so on and so forth. But they're incredibly distrusted, so this sort of training area also acts almost like an indoctrination centre to keep them in line. And if that doesn't work, then you have the Guardians. Now, the Guardians also have some sort of mystical ability that is linked to orogeny, but it's not the same. They can basically nullify that ability in others, and that helps keep them in control of the group, so to speak. On top of that, you do also have the general government as well that overviews the area. You also have lots of stuff like, they call it stone law, and this is written rules chiseled into stone tablets, apparently, which tells all the communities how they have to live, especially, for example, during a 5th season, so that they can survive. So you have all that. You also have investigation into how orogeny works and how it feels and how it's utilized throughout the world as well. You also get insights into the different groups and how they interact, especially in terms of how the leadership cast in particular tend to interact with Orogens. That's quite interesting as well. And also the physical descriptions of the world and how harsh it is are really, really well done. And this, as already mentioned, is exceptionally good world building. I can't really go into too much detail past all that, because number one, I think you should go and read this, and I don't want to spoil anything. But number two, potentially it could be spoilery if I go any further in. So instead of that, let's have a look at the characters. So there are a number of characters in this, but there are 3 primary ones. So we're going to go through them based by their age, realistically. So the first one is Demaya, and she is the youngest of the group. Her story begins at the start of the story, as she is taken away from her family after using orogeny by accident, and she's picked up by a guardian who's called Schaefer and taken to the Fulcrum to be trained. And then you fast forward, Demaya's name she's given by the guardian, who takes the previous name away, and it fast forwards a few years to when she's at the Fulcrum and she's training to control her abilities. And she's quite quiet, she's very determined to prove herself, but she's a bit of a daydreamer as well. She's very, very naive in her outlook of the world in many, many regards. And she wants to do the best that she can. But the other thing she does is she tends to wander around the grounds a lot. She goes to places where she's allowed to go, but most people don't. She loves to explore and find and learn and almost push the boundaries a little bit. She is shown to be quite powerful for her age, and also ability to be quite skilled, and in fact she is one of the most advanced in her age group in many regards. After that, the other next character in terms of age is Sirenite. So Sirenite is a few years older, maybe about 10 years older, and she has 4 rings. So rings are a status symbol for Orogenes, and specifically in this case it goes up to 10, a 10 ringer being the most powerful. And her story is that she's allocated to work alongside one of the few 10 ringers in the world, Alabaster, and they are sent to the coastal town of Alia to help with some issues they're having in the harbour there, and to help solve whatever that issue is. But on top of that as well, the Fulcrum want them to breed to create another child, because both of these people are very, very powerful in the actual skill of orogeny. I have so many issues with that word. In many regards, she's also quite naive about the world. She's very much been indoctrinated into the ways of how she's meant to behave as set out in Stone Law and set out by the Fulcrum. She is quite spiky as a character. She isn't particularly likable. She's very headstrong, she's very bold, she's very brash, she's borderline arrogant. She's not a particularly likable character at the start of her arc, and she does soften and she becomes less naive because of some of the things she sees throughout the story. Of the 3 sort of main characters in here, she is the least likable of the group. So I've mentioned Alabaster there, and whilst he's not a point of view character, it's worth mentioning him here. He is supremely powerful beyond anything that Sirenite has ever seen or experienced. But he's been around long enough to know that not everything they were taught in the Fulcrum is true. And he's discovered some truths about the organisation, about the Guardians, that doesn't sit well with him. And he believes that Orogenes can be something far more than they currently are. And this causes a lot of chafing between him and Sirenite, especially early on. He's also borderline insane in many regards, and is a truly terrifying character when he is on the verge of losing control of his powers. He is regarded as broken by some people that see him later on in the story as well. And I think of all the characters in this, to me, he's the most interesting in many regards as well. The final character that's a point of view character is Essen. And Essen's story kicks off as the 5th season is beginning. And again, like Demaya, Alabaster and Sirenite, Essen is also an Orogene. But she is living within a community. She's been there about 10 years. And she had 2 children. But her youngest showed signs of orogeny, and her husband murdered that child in its sleep and has taken her other child and fled the community. And she is grieving, and her story is very much on, I am going to get my revenge on her husband, who was named Gija, and I'm going to find my other child. And she is a far more worn down character in many ways. She is very cynical about the world because she's seen how her people have been treated, and she's distrustful of others, which makes complete sense because of the world setting. And her story is her going out to find her missing child, and her journey partway across the world during the onset of this 5th season. And during that time, she tries to keep to herself, but she ends up bumping into 2 other characters that are worthy of note. The first one is Hoa, who is An unusual human-like child appears to be about 10 years old. She just meets him randomly while travelling, him just staring at her. And there's something off about him, which she can't quite put her fingers on. However, he does seem to have a really powerful ability to track where Gija and Mason may have gone, which is why she ends up travelling with him. And the other character is called Tonki. Now, Tonki has a really interesting reveal later on in the book. Tonki is a wilder, for want of a better term. They live outside of any established community, where people believe that people who live outside the communities are cannibals and all sorts of things. But Tonki isn't any of that. So Tonki is a transgender male to female person who is fascinated by the world. They're the sort of person that wants to take everything apart to see how it works. They have a real thirst for knowledge and how things work. And again, they end up traveling with Essen for a little bit. A lot of it is because of Hoa, because again, they can see that Hoa's not quite right, and it's suggested that they may know why Hoa or what Hoa is. And so Tonki decides, at least on the surface, to follow along, just really to study and observe Hoa. I can't go into any more detail for all these characters. They do all have a link up towards the end of the book, and it's really interesting payoff as well. But the characterization is really, really strong. You feel sorry for Essen in particular. You want to strangle Cyrenite, and Demaya, you're just looking at, you can sort of, you're almost in awe of a childlike innocence and naivety. And there are real interesting difference between all three of the main characters, which really helps sell their characterization and their part in the story and the world that this is taking part in. The character work is really strong. Presentation then. So I don't have much to say about the actual cover of the book. I think the cover's absolutely fine. But there are a few little things in the book that are quite interesting. So the first thing is it has a map, which we all like maps. Now, there's not really a huge amount on the map. And I find that quite interesting as a choice, because it makes me wonder if in this world this is what maps are like for normal people, either incomplete or wholly inaccurate, because it could be one or even both. So that's really interesting. You also have a glossary of terms in the back, because they do use certain words in here which are alternative to what we use. For example, they use a shortened version of community. They call them comms. If they're trying to sense something, they call it sessing, stuff like that. Nothing major. And it also sort of details some of the organizations and gives you a little bit more background on those as well. So that's really appreciated, especially in a book that is this dense in terms of world building. But the thing that's really interesting to me is the writing style, because from the points of view of Cyrenite and Demaya, it's third person. It's written as most fantasy books are, sort of a mix of third or first person. But Essen is different. Essen is almost narrated. It's written in the second person, and so it's very much Nessun thinks this, Nessun does this, you think that. So it's like an external narrator speaking for them, and that's really interesting, and it really makes Essen's story pop a little bit more. And I think part of the reason for that is because, unlike Demaya and Cyrenite, Essen is going through the 5th season's onset, whereas they were set before. But it really makes her story jump out. There are a number of interesting twists in here as well. One of them, which is never really explained, but there's a question right at the end of the book, the very last line in the book. And I'd sort of guessed that the question that was asked at the end, I'd sort of figured out there was something to do with that and the cause of everything that was going on. So that was really interesting. I didn't pick up on the major tie-in between the three main characters though, and once it was revealed what the connection was, it was a oh shit moment kind of thing. It was really, really good, and the writing is spectacular. It is quite dry in places, but as is the nature of something that has this much world building in there, you kind of expect that. And because the world is so brutal, the sort of utilitarian nature of the way it's written works really, really strongly. So, again, like all other aspects, the overall presentation of this is really strong as well. So, I've already said I really, 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 really think this goodies book. There we go. This book is good. The world building is the best I've seen in a book for a long time. The characters are believable. They're really strongly written. It's telling a really interesting story. It's got some really, really interesting sort of twists and turns in there as well. I think if you like dystopian books, fantasy books, even sci-fi books, there is a lot to love here. And I cannot wait to read the follow-up book, which I believe is called The Obelisk Gate. The question is, can I put this in S tier? And I think I'm not going to yet. I think for now it's going to go into A tier. I think it's really, really strong. I do think, because of the writing style, a few people may struggle with this. And the other reason I don't want to put this into S tier is, as a rule of thumb, I don't like to put more than one book from a series in top tier. And I want to read the rest of the series first, and then after that, we'll see how I feel after I finish the trilogy. But what I want to know is, have you read this? What did you think of this? And also, have you read any of Jemisin's other books? Or do you even have any recommendations for me to read? As always, leave stuff in the comments below. Let me know. I'll catch you all next time.